Hi, Greg. How are you?
Hey, good Martin. How are you doing?
Yeah, really well, thank you. Well, thanks for joining us today on our XRVerse podcast series. As has kind of been the normal kind of setup that we've done before and for our audience, could you kind of talk us through a little bit about yourself and I guess the role that you're doing at Bentley Systems?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Martin. So let's just start. Bentley Systems, if people don't know it, it's a software company. It's not a car company.
Yes.
So we provide software for the global architecture, engineering, construction, infrastructure market. So these are engineers, architects, builders, contractors, and we build software for that market. And then myself specifically, I run our digital innovation lab, and here in London, based in the UK, and we're like a small team that's exploring. Okay, what new technology could we leverage that's coming up that could extend the value proposition of all of our existing products in that market. And of late, really in the last year, obviously the metaverse was the big hot buzzword. So we took a really hard look at what would it mean if we could get all these engineering grade 3D models, and photogrammetry models, running inside of game engines and in these new trends. So we've looked at everything from the Omniverse, from NVIDIA, Unity, Unreal Engine. And so it's in the last year really kind of dug in a bit on workflows around the use of Unreal Game Engine, and just seeing some really interesting opportunities there.
Yeah. So kind of over the last 5 years of being with Bentley Systems, what have been the biggest kind of innovations that have impressed you the most?
Oh, well, in the last 5 years. Well, that's about 5 years ago, almost now. I came into Bentley Systems through an acquisition. It was a part of a startup called Synchro.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a big innovation, in fact. And Synchro, this is me personally. There's others I can talk about, but Synchro was kind of an investment in Bentley to say, wow, the construction market is something they want to get into, and specifically. Synchro is a 4D construction animation simulation tool. So it's really first in class in that space. It takes 3D models, BIM models, like 3D models, links it up with construction schedules. And so literally the actual construction schedule, Gantt chart timelines. And then our innovation there was linking 3D models with construction scheduling, Gantt charts. And then that is what produced animation simulation.
Yeah.
So really it's a full-blown construction simulation, visual representation of how you would build a building, for example. And so that's how I came into Bentley. We were acquired, and that continues to kind of grow and be invested in and gain market traction. So that's a huge innovation. The other big innovation, I would say, around the same time, 4 or 5 years in now, is moving from file-based workflows to cloud-based workflows. And so that's what, if you look at the Bentley website and kind of dig in a bit, you'll see a lot of language around digital twins and what we call the iTwin platform. And so this is all about not just moving files back and forth in a file share system, but federating files into the cloud. Is essentially like a cloud-hosted database of all that geometry and metadata. And then once it's in that database, okay, now what can you do with it? So render models in the web browser, build extensions that can feed information into that database. And actually that forms the basis for all the work we're doing now with Unreal Engine. We're actually tapping into the cloud core data, and just through API calls, extracting meshes and geometry and streaming that geometry from the cloud right into Unreal Engine. So we've kind of bypassed, kind of trying to jump past just doing a file export import of a file, and really talk about just real-time data streaming. And I think you need to have that approach. That was all being developed even before the metaverse was becoming like a term. And so I think we were in the right space. So because that plumbing was kind of being set up, and then we start building pipelines on top of that, I think it starts to hit some of the requirements of a metaverse experience, which is like real-time interactivity, real-time rendering. Yeah.
So in I guess, in a kind of more traditional industry like the kind of AEC sector, I guess, where traditionally it's a bit more kind of old school, I think is probably the I guess,
Yeah.
or sometimes I guess I guess they kind of don't like innovation a lot of times, some of the companies, because they've I guess quite kind of fixed mindset in terms of how things are built or constructed. How what have been the kind of biggest barriers that you've seen, I guess, for more traditional industries where innovation hasn't been at the core of their business or their industry, sorry, to kind of to encourage them to innovate?
hmm Yeah, it's a tough one. I think there's a broader narrative there, which is just the migration or the adoption of 3D workflows over 2D, right? So that's like the first big step, is how do you go from just drawing vector lines and producing, floor plans and elevations, 2D graphics. So there's that, right? That's a continuous evolution. And that's this whole subject of like BIM, building information modeling.
Sure, yeah.
And the industry's been kind of going through that shift for about, 20 years now. In fact, that was a company product I first worked. The first startup I worked with actually was it was called Revit Technology.
Yeah.
Which is now kind of an industry standard, BIM tool. So that's the first sort. You have to kind of get people to say, hey, there's just sort of like intrinsic value in 3D modeling, and kind of that's kind of an easy sell. Honestly, I think there's a lot of things to say about that. And then once you kind of get over that hurdle, you say, wow, well, 3D, what's the value of 3D? Well, it's a more intuitive, natural way to understand space, architecture, look for clashes, find problems. When you bring that into the construction space, it's it's the same story. Instead of just looking at a Gantt chart,
Sure, yeah,
and trying to imagine a construction sequence, and you've already got access to 3D models. Well, now you're looking at where are like health and safety issues in a three-dimensional way, and where should we put the tower crane, and what are the site access points, and is the sequence actually correct? When you actually put the 3D model against the schedule, does it make sense?
sure.
So these are just ways to like just further interrogate your thinking, right? Like, is the design right? Well, you can look at a floor plan, but like if you have in 3D, you can further validate and get in discussions and basically prototype your approach in a way that you can resolve all the issues quicker. So I think that's it. Like I think 3D and 4D, it's just a very great prototyping environment to test your ideas and validate your approaches. And I think more or less architects have mostly got on board this ship now, and then now that kind of leads into like, okay, what about the game engine stuff? And look at the recent thing with Epic Games has shifted a bit, not just Fortnite and building games, but they're really offering software into the architecture and engineering space for real, and if you want to kind of get into VR and AR, you're going to be needing to use tools like Unity and Unreal Engine. It's like kind of like it's sort of primed for that. So
do you think a lot of the I guess the kind of more main contractor, the kind of more global kind of construction companies, do they see the perceived value of kind of AR, VR, and now metaverse kind of technology, or do they still kind of need a bit more, I guess, convincing that it will add value to their business?
No, I think all the main contractors, like really tier 1, tier 2, top 100, top 50, they're pretty dialed into this at this point.
Okay.
There's a lot going on in that space. I think where you see like laggard, where adoption is going to be slower, it's in those mid-sized firms. Right, like building like low-rise residential, commercial, that type of stuff, single-family housing. That's a bit more of a stretch from the architect and construction standpoint. Like, you're not going to see like probably a contractor just building like single-family homes, maybe making these investments. But for sure, all the major infrastructure, architecture, construction projects, you'll see it. Almost every major high-rise this project going up in the city of London is using 3D modeling. Absolutely. We were involved in with the Crossrail project, heavy use of 3D modeling and 4D there, and of course that's the Elizabeth line now. So big piece of core infrastructure So
Yeah.
I am seeing big projects definitely in investing in this technology.
It's good then, I guess, if more traditional industries are starting to see the real value of it, I guess, and kind of are buying into as I say, the value that it can bring to their business and to the sector as a whole, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Um,
definitely on the uptick, I would say.
I mean, obviously, I know we kind of mentioned the key buzzword of the moment earlier, kind of the metaverse. But how important is it, do you think, to versus obviously, as you mentioned before, I guess that you were already progressing with things like kind of augmented and virtual reality technology before, metaverse became the buzzword. How important do you think it is the term metaverse to markets like kind of AEC?
It's interesting. So I think the term, it's like how important is the term? I would say that even if you take away the term metaverse and we just talk about interactive 3D immersive experiences, that's been happening for a long time. We've had 3D models running in virtual production, like multi-projection systems, like Mission Room, for example.
Yeah.
VR's been on the table for a long time. HoloLens, we've developed HoloLens applications for many years. So then, like, okay, what makes the metaverse new or different? And I think part of it is what I was mentioning with the cloud, like the real-time networked access.
Yeah.
I really believe that there's an aspect here to the metaverse, which is like it's the internet, but experienced as 3D, computer graphics. And in our domain, I think this is what's interesting. And let's call it the subject. Let's call it like industrial metaverse versus commercial and enterprise. Is we don't have like this. It's not like this content problem where you need to hire an agency to build like a cool room or like a gallery to sell a pair of shoes. Because again, back to that 3D thing, if all these accounts and contractors and architects are already building very detailed 3D models, right, engineering grade precision models, and we're saying we've built a cloud infrastructure where those models can like stream right into a game engine. This to me starts to now suggest not more than just like rendering a file on a screen, but real-time connection, leveraging game engines, and then now you can start to then really talk about multiplayer experience, right? Because now you're saying we're running on game engines, we're cloud enabled. Well, let's have a design review with multiple people, right, in the model together, reviewing issues, with or without an avatar. You might just be in the scene together. But then if you start to kind of extend our use of things like Teams and Zooms and just imagine those interactions, right, happening actually in the architecture and the engineering model, and we're all looking at something and identifying clashes and updating it. And then we just close down, and then tomorrow we reconnect in that world. That game is still running like real time, So I think that's where I think the metaverse starts to add another layer of like functionality, let's say, on top of a traditional, like file-based, rendering workflow.
Do you think it's kind of almost the, for want of a better word, almost the glue that's kind of going to hold a lot of, bring a lot of these technologies together, a lot of things like kind of AI, digital twins, IoT, AR, VR, that'll almost be the kind of bucket, I guess, that kind of all of those technologies sit in?
I think so. I think, like from a let's do like a cloud platform perspective, right? Assuming you've got kind of this place where you can store and federate and start to organize different inputs into the digital twin, right? So the 3D model is one input. IoT sensor data contextualized against an object like a sensor. Reality capture in the form of 360 photos or laser scans. And so all of these things start to connect in a geospatial representation that can be accessed right through the internet. Not necessarily a web browser. Web browser, yes, but like just let's call it the internet, which means you could access it through a VR headset. You could access it through an AR experience on a phone. You could open your laptop and be plugged into that. And and information can keep kind of plugging into it. So effectively, we're building out like a core infrastructure that will allow all this information to sort of federate into these rich geospatial representations of the world.
Yeah.
And and if that starts to scale up in a massive way, it becomes interesting. Like the entire planet could have this like kind of digital copy that's being constantly updated.
What do you think will kind of be the biggest barriers to the success of the industrial metaverse?
I think tough one. There's a lot of players out there. I think a lack of openness or standards for communication that could cause problems. There has to be a way for data to communicate from one platform to the next, or from one environment to the next. Like imagine if the internet didn't have something like HTML as a core layer, and it was somehow like if certain code only ran on Edge browser but didn't run on Chrome, and like these type of things.
Sure,
could be a huge barrier. So I think there has to be some agreement on standards and communication protocols, and how that all works out. I think too another thing that might come up is just making sure all this stuff is properly managed and securely accessed, right? So we're talking about a complete 3D representation of something, and you certainly don't want like bad actors to access that in some way and suddenly know how to get inside a facility, and they shouldn't be able to. So there's just sort of general security questions to probably will come up for sure. It's got to be secure, and from that perspective. And then I guess another one is just the technology to support it, right? There's a huge computational demand on this type of stuff. It's different than just we're talking about 3D graphics here. It's different than like Google Maps or Waze, where it's a problem's been solved with maps.
Yes.
Right. We kind of have the whole planet kind of infinitely zoomable and scalable with maps today. We haven't quite figured out how to do that with fully detailed, rich 3D models.
Yeah.
And I think there's more of a computational demand on that, so that has to be also overcome.
Do you think, I guess, for in markets, so when you break it down, I guess, between the kind of consumer, industrial, and enterprise metaverse, do you think it will end up becoming a single platforms, I guess, where there's kind of interoperability between them all, i.e., like the internet, for argument's sake, where there's one internet? Do you think it will be, that kind of thing, or do you think it will be more a case of where, I guess, companies are joining together and kind of almost partnering or collaborating to kind of almost provide data as and when it's needed?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it depends. It's like the internet analogy, right? We're all running everything on like the internet, which is this huge system.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that like you could access like my personal OneDrive or get into like private files. So, but at the same time, we're all communicating over like TCP and IP, and there's a comms thing there. So again, I think there's a backbone, and then all the permissions would be worked out, because it's like I might be in a very restricted environment where like a construction worker, they don't want that model accessed to anybody but that team.
Yeah.
And likewise, like maybe I'm in that model. Do I really need to like hyperlink and like suddenly like zoom into some like Louis Vuitton like abstract metaverse? I don't know. Like, it may not make sense, but again, like the internet, you could be one tab away from that. So who's to say that on the one hand you might be in like a engineering model of a new stadium, and then boom, click away, and now you're buying another pair of shoes. I think it could certainly work out like that.
Yeah, interesting. And it's something I think that we kind of see more and more of, particularly with the companies we're talking to, I think, is around the whole kind of AI piece. Where does kind of AI feature, I guess, you look at things like kind of AR and VR and mixed reality for that matter, where does kind of artificial intelligence kind of figure in all of this?
It's a really good one. So let's just think about this idea. Like, we hear a lot of like, generative AI, for example. If I think about generative AI in the context of like architectural design or urban planning, like and we've seen things like Midjourney, and what that can do as producing 2D graphics. Imagine if you just start giving prompts, constraints for what you want that building, that architecture, that space to do, and you've got a game engine as a base layer, and AI could just start generating three-dimensional geometry and options, and it's following local regulations, right? You could say, I want a building, mixed-use residential retail on this piece of land following local regulations, and it needs to be a low carbon footprint, locally sourced materials. Like, boom, could it actually just start to produce something? And through prompting, you just start to massage that thing. So the AI is helping you construct things that it may be a matter of a day that could take months to navigate through. So that's one aspect.
Yeah.
And the other is then imagine another aspect might be you're in that model, and that model has access to many other versions of models and ideas. And you could, again, back to the metaverse, what if you're in that space and you've got avatars, like three-dimensional robots or whatever, however you want to position them. It's like, give ChatGPT a body, and you're talking to it, and you're just asking questions about, like, hey, where should I focus my attention on this project? Where are likely problems going to be in the construction here? And it could just be like, you know what? Let's go over here, and it could direct your attention to something. They say, this could be a problem. You might want to reconsider this. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's like really
Super
interesting
smart,
things.
Yeah. Because I guess, like you say, I mean, particularly on construction, because I mean, most construction projects don't go according to plan, and sometimes run over time, over budget, and things like that. Where exactly as you say, I guess if you've got the AI kind of feeding back to you to be going, hey, Greg, your attention needs to be on the groundworks or whatever, then I guess you can spot those things straight away, can't it?
Yep. And then imagine this. Imagine we're all in like, let's call it like a Teams meeting in the metaverse version, having conversations about it, fixing issues, identifying issues. This could be for manufacturing or car design too, for that matter, right? And then imagine that all those conversations become contextualized against the 3D model and the changes that were made.
Yeah.
So now you've got this interesting kind of source of training data. So then in the future, again, this is back to like it kind of directing your attention. It could be like,
sure, yeah.
Based on all these previous conversations and, changes it's seen to 3D, it would just be like, you know what, probably this is something you might want to look at. I could almost guarantee you're going to want to change this, right? It's going to like, maybe it's not going to change it for you, but it can be like, I think this is a problem, It'd be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, it kind of almost takes a lot of I guess it de-risks a lot of construction projects as well, doesn't it? In the sense of that, and particularly, I guess, where, it might be quite a tricky or kind of challenging project to kind of almost, if that can kind of do all the thought processes for you and identify risk and things, and more importantly, I guess, potential, sinkholes where you might lose a lot of money, then yeah, I think it's a really kind of smart way of thinking about it.
Yeah. So I think that's a wide open landscape there, and obviously it's the new topic. But I think in the next couple of years, these are just a few ideas, right, that have come across my mind just in the last few months with all the Chat GPT kind of thinking. So I think I just think keep your eye on that space, and I think almost like sky's the limit with this stuff. And what's the intersection look like? That's what I think is cool. Like let's not. Oh, it's not that like AI is the new thing and the metaverse is gone. It's more like, what does AI plus the metaverse combined look like?
Yeah, totally.
That's really interesting.
Because I guess that's the thing, isn't it? Like we touched on, I think with the whole metaverse thing, it's where the technologies are kind of complementing each other rather than it almost being kind of one or the other. That it's kind of all of them working together at the same time to kind of almost drive a solution, whatever it is. And I think that's what makes it so exciting.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I mean, seriously, you can bring AI into this conversation. You can bring IoT. Again, this is the industrial side of things. You can bring IoT in. You can bring cameras, sensors, computer vision. Like, there's so much tech in that space, in that kind of industrial space that maybe is not relevant in like the commercial and enterprise space. So I think it's a really exciting space to be in, because like all that stuff is kind of on the table right now.
Yeah. Because I guess, particularly when you look at in industrial engineering markets like kind of manufacturing, automotive and construction and things, I mean, the amount of data that most companies are amassing is huge, and so the data pool and data sets are extraordinary in terms of volume. So I guess if there's that kind of almost ability to then be able to manipulate that and almost do, trending analysis and things like that, then I guess from a kind of macro level, it obviously increases productivity and increases profitability in industries that are typically quite margin sensitive, to kind of increase, I guess improve their profits.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's real tangible benefits to be made. It's not like just a nice to have.
Yeah.
Which I think is cool. That's not to say I don't think the other metaverse stuff is not going to just emerge, right? Like, I think we'll continue to see trends where you might pop into a website for any given company, and rather than just 2D graphics and screens, you're going to start just navigating through 3D worlds, and instead of a little pop-up chat thing, it might just be you're talking to an avatar of somebody. So I think we're going to see kind of cultural trends keep moving in that direction, and then the industrial space will just keep using this tech. But of course, in these industrial scenarios, it's always about what you're getting at, like improving productivity, improving safety, delivering things on time, on budget, making better decisions about design, faster, so tighter feedback loops. So
yeah. So from a if we kind of fast forward, say 3 to 5 years, which is difficult at the moment to even predict anything is changing that fast, but from a skills point of view, I mean, how do you think the skills profile of the people that work in what will be the metaverse, or hopefully that term's still around in the next 5 years, what will be in your opinion, what will be the kind of key skill sets or key traits that people have to be successful?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. This kind of ties into like how we came to know each other. Is we're in the space of architecture, engineering, construction, and in fact, two guys working for me now, were introduced to me through you, and they're coming from the game engine background, gaming, right? They're really like gamers, building games, AR, VR. They weren't in this space yet, but we were able to attract that talent, and I'm seeing more and more ability to attract that talent. So that, I think in this space, right, this the ability to kind of like know how to be proficient in game engine technology, whether it's Unity or Unreal. I think that's a huge plus at the moment. I don't see that trend diminishing in any way. And part of that is just an agile, rapid prototyping mindset is another thing I found. When using tools like Unity and Unreal, it's just amazing how fast you can produce interactive prototypes. So I think it's almost like, it's also like an amazing dev platform for iteration. So that's I think very powerful. And I think just starting to be conscious of this AI stuff, and like it's almost like there's this new skill like prompters, like what is that all about? That where you can like write the right question and get a good answer. I think that is really interesting. If you ever kind of yourself tried ChatGPT, at some point there's just this blank question, like, okay, and it's up to you in a way. If you want to get value out of it, you kind of have to know the right question to ask.
Totally.
And I think being a very good question asker is non-trivial.
Interesting.
Like there's something to be said about that, being good at asking good questions. And what does that mean? And so I think that's a great skill set to focus on. I know that's quite a broad idea, but seriously, it's in any conversation, just imagine like, what is a good question? And it's a bit harder than you think when you get into it.
It's a really interesting kind of point that, I guess, because particularly, if you're working as obviously because you can now kind of generate images using AI as well as kind of code and things like that. But I guess kind of having that innate skill to know how to drive something like that, I think is really powerful, isn't it? And it's something, I guess, as at the moment, it takes a heck of a lot of effort, when you're sat in front of just, kind of watching the cursor flashing on ChatGPT or whatever. It's like, okay,
what am I going to ask?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of what information do I want to get out of this? I think it's a really powerful skill to develop, and I guess kind of people will have to get trained on it, whether that's at academic level in university or what have you, for the for the next generation, or even for the people in the workforce now, how to ask the right questions.
Yeah, seriously. Or like how to really frame a set of requirements in a way that
Yeah.
solve the problem you're trying to get at. Like, how do you frame a tough problem in a way that you can get a good answer back? And this is part of all product design activity anyway, right? It's like understanding like what is the problem, how to frame that problem, how to ask questions to an end user about like what are your problems, and then start to get feedback, and that's sort of how you start to develop product as well. Right?
So do you think then, do you think the kind of more, I guess, industries like, kind of software engineering, for argument's sake, that the requirement will be that those people become more client facing than, potentially what they might be at the moment, to understand the pain points from the client, or, I guess to kind of feed in, like you were saying about what questions to ask, that they kind of almost need to speak to the kind of end, to the end client or end user to work out what those problems are that they're trying to solve. Yeah,
I think you might get multiple responses to that, but me personally, I actually I think there's value in bringing developers to the table, and they interface with end users.
Yeah.
And I think it allows them to feel more connected with what they're developing, understand like what is the impact, how is this software actually being used. Also, I think it helps to build a bit of empathy with the end user. So I know a lot of people don't have that opinion. It's like, okay, keep the developers kind of off to the side, they're doing their thing. Product management and designers, they'll deal with the end user. But I personally, I like to bring the whole team into these conversations. I think it's hugely valuable.
Yeah. Because I guess, like you say, at least then they've got that full interaction. They can kind of almost see it and hear it firsthand, then, can't they? And it's not almost like kind of, you're describing it, describing the problem or the kind of potential solution to them. But they can actually kind of almost see it firsthand, I guess, and they're much more kind of engaged and involved in the process.
Yeah. No, and you got me thinking. Now, imagine the next level is when the app is running, a metaverse app. Well, the developer can pop in as an avatar or an observer and just kind of be in the space with the user.
Yeah.
And you're listening to the user even provide feedback on the experience itself.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing, like what other ways could you start to understand how people are using these metaverse experiences, and then those become part of feedback loops to continually improve it. Right. So not just like watching a screen, you could be actually in the environment with the end user, and like seeing where they're looking and understanding like paths and where are users actually going. I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, it is a super exciting time. I mean, I guess for you personally, what would you like the kind of next few years to look like, I guess, from a metaverse point of view, for both kind of personally and professionally? What would you kind of like it to look like, say, in 3 years' time?
Well, I'd love to see all major construction architecture, taking advantage of this technology. Like it's easy to me to imagine that we really do move from just opening files to just connecting to these rich 3D worlds and having full-blown interactions inside of it. So I think we've already gotten used to remote collaboration through Teams and Zoom, and I could really imagine 3 to 5 years that goes to that next level. Like we're having the meeting in the 3D model and talking about it and discussing it, in real time. So I think that seems very reasonable, very practical. And I think, culturally we're kind of like comfortable with remote collaboration, but now we just take it to the next dimension, right? Like full 3-dimensional interactions together.
Yeah.
So
what about outside of work? I mean, I guess in your leisure time, what would you kind of equally want it to look like there?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's funny. In many ways, I feel like the metaverse it's like already kind of here in some ways. I feel like when I pick up my phone and I use something like Uber, I'm already kind of seeing like a real-time version of reality happening. And, it's kind of already there in some ways, and Google Maps is now getting more and more three-dimensional now. Like London's actually one of these cities where like nerf technology is happening. So I think, just as an average user, like, when you start using Google Maps, it's going to be real time. You're going to see increased higher fidelity 3D models appearing. Maybe you'll be like pop into that store and have that full three-dimensional rich experience, before you go there. And I think we're going to see eventually, probably AR first, and maybe eventually, mixed reality headsets plug in for more and more experiences. There's a thing down the street for me. It's like a Dolly experience. Again, available for anybody. You can go there and experience this massive immersive projection system. And then also pop into like an Oculus, like a VR experience, and get some like really interesting things going on there. So I do think that it's gonna start to find its way into those environments, right? Exhibits, art galleries, studios. There's another thing. I met the CEO of a company. They're installing a HoloLens experience at the Natural History Museum in Paris.
Oh, okay.
And it's sort of like a couple pounds or euros. You go in there, you put the HoloLens on, and you actually get to see these extinct animals kind of like running around through the space, and it's a way to kind of engage the senses and experience things that are no longer alive, right? And then that starts to get people talking about climate change, and do we want to what are the risks associated with that. But so I think I'm seeing even examples where the use of AR VR technology is becoming more and more just a part of something you might experience on a daily basis.
I guess at the risk of asking an obvious question, but I mean, how important do you think the hardware will be in all of this?
It's a big deal. HoloLens still has a bit of an issue. It's just the limitation of the field of view, the computer you have to wear, the weight of it. Everyone's still waiting. Like, is Apple going to announce something? One day. Let's see. But like the iPhone changed everything. Eventually, a pair of wearable wearable glasses used to. But on a personal note too, like despite all this cool tech and like a lot of times just see with the HoloLens or Oculus on my head, I still love dropping everything and like getting down to Spain and just getting lost in old medieval European cities with like everything's chaotic and like stone and like there's nothing digital around. So in my fantasy dream world, this AI generated architecture, right? It wouldn't just be extruded glass boxes like we see going up in the city. It would be a way that could generate complexity and contradiction and like rich physical environments that kind of reconnect to our senses. Like I think that's super important to balance all this hard technical digital stuff, but then like what do we really want our cities to look and feel like? So I don't want the technology to ever kind of allow us to lose touch with what it means to make meaningful like architecture in space.
I mean, it would be pretty amazing, wouldn't it? I guess if they do, I guess if some of the urban planners, I guess, do choose to kind of look to the past in terms of, building kind of old architecture like you see, particularly like you say that you see in Spain and things like that. I mean, probably not have everything Gaudi inspired, but I guess where it is kind of, but where it kind of does have a nod to the past rather than the kind of big box style buildings, I guess, that kind of get constructed these days.
Just make it complex. I think it can be done with computation. I think there's this idea that you could have complexity and quality, but without being overly expensive. So, very like complex things, but without causing extra expense. I think there's always been this assumption that, wow, it's like cost. You can't have these, complex environments without in adding extra cost. But maybe this computational systems could find that balance. This idea of mass customization.
Well, like saying if you've got AI tools that can then basically kind of spot spot potential kind of challenges as they come up, then
Mhm.
it kind of I guess the whole thing just is kind of risk management, isn't it? Really, to kind of to mitigate it as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the risks, what I'm bringing up is a new one, which is like, one risk could be the population is unhappy, dissatisfied, feel like they're just like, like just a number plugged into like an extrusion. And so it's like, we don't want the tools to produce cities and environments that that devalue the human experience. So I think all of that value engineering, that's that. But like, let's not lose sight of like what makes us want to be in a city and be proud of a city. And like, what gives a city its identity is like, it is all that richness and complexity. It's like what allows someone to know they're like in Paris, or they're in like Brooklyn, or they're, in the West End. And or like in, for me, like Barcelona's got this very unique quality to it.
Yeah.
And so I think the tools can help create and maintain that kind of sense of place.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it certainly looks like quite a bright future anyway for the next few years, and kind of interesting to see how things pan out with it.
I hope so.
Cool. Definitely. Well, thank you very much for your time, Greg. It's been great chatting, and I'll look forward to kind of catching up with you in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Martyn.
Thank you. Cheers.
Talk
Bye-bye.
soon.